So this is our last segment together. And this is a question and answer session. In regards to courtship, if a couple continues to court for more than 3 years, are there any problems, or what advice can you give this couple? So if this is a real life question that someone is asking about their personal situation, or a real life situation for their friend, what I would suggest is that they speak to their spiritual confidant, whether it's someone significant in their vicinity, an elder, or if people are so inclined, elder test they may approach. But I'd either go, depending on where this person is, to your local elder, then your continental elder, or elder test. The preference is to go to local elders and your continental elder first in order to seek for counsel. So I think the first thing I would want to know is why they're in courtship for 3 years. How did they meet? Is there an issue, or there are problems? Is there a reason why it's so long? Because normally a courtship wouldn't be that long, but each situation varies one from another. Assuming there is nothing fundamentally wrong, no problems, both partners are happy and healthy, then there isn't anything fundamentally wrong with being in a courtship for 3 years. There are no set rules or set regulations that it has to be a fixed time period, 12 months, 15 months. It can be 12 months, it could be 5 years. The longer it is, the more we would question, or we should question, the couple should question, why is there a problem in making the final commitment into engagement leading into marriage? Why would it be taking that long? There may be reasons. Someone might be in education and they may not be able to feel ready. There sometimes may be financial constraints. But if there's problems between yourselves, then 3 years would indicate that the problems are probably quite serious and you may need help addressing them. The other reason that comes up often is, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, people begin to court prematurely without first being friends. And I think it's important to develop a friendship with somebody, often beginning as a platonic friendship, and then it may feelings may develop after that, but just to get to know someone without sharing how you feel about them. And as that friendship grows and develops, love will grow and develop, and you'll get to a stage where you will realize that you are in love. And at that stage, I think courtship is an appropriate move to make. And if you've followed along those kind of steps, you've already known the person around 12 months as a minimum, perhaps even up to 18 months. And so a 12, 18 month courtship doesn't sound particularly short. Often, particularly in the past, both men and women have felt in this movement that they're not allowed to have friendships with someone of the opposite sex. And because of that, if someone has liked somebody, they jump from 0 straight into courtship. And in those situations, 12 months would probably not be long enough. I think people can get themselves into problems with the 12-month courtship with virtually no relationship beforehand. I'd recommend that someone watch the presentations that we've done recently, and also the presentations that I did in, I think it's 2018 in France. I like to think it was last year, but I think I got corrected recently. It was 2018. It's an 11-part series on courtship. So I'd recommend people watching that, or the recent studies on relationships that we did, and we addressed this point in a bit more detail than I've mentioned now, particularly the 2018 studies. So hopefully I've answered that question. So the next question, this is another courtship marriage question. We've had quite a few of these now. This is the scenario. I'm assuming it's real life, and I'm assuming it's from Zimbabwe because it speaks about lobola. As I say, I'm not an expert on lobola, but for those who are not familiar with the term, I'm going to use the word dowry and substitute that for lobola. And I think it's a close enough association. With dowry, people often just think about the money or the exchange of, an animal, often tens of animals. And I just want to remind us that even in a system like that of dowry, that it's more than just the exchange of money. There are other actions that you have to do, other rituals or ceremonies that are connected with the whole subject of dowries. And it certainly is with lobola. In most cultures that practice this, it's not just you pay a check and everything's done and dusted. It's more complex than that. So, this is the scenario. I entered into a lobola contract years ago. Years ago to me sounds like more than 2 or 3. I was charged X amount of dollars and paid what I had, and I was left with a debt or a balance. So the person doesn't give the amount. This is obviously a brother, because it's the brothers that pay the money. And I'll give an example. He was charged $100. It's much more than $100, of course. He only had 50, so he paid 50 as a down payment, perhaps you could call it that, and he was left with 50. That was the balance. The numbers are much, much higher than that. The signing of the contract was before or in front of all my family and my father-in-law's family. He calls it a delegation because it's often more than just family or immediate family. It can be relatives, uncles, aunts, etc. Sometimes leaders, community leaders. In different parts of the world, they might call it their clan leader or their tribe leader. So it's a delegation. I signed acknowledging I left a lobola balance, and I was to come back and finish paying the balance. The contract is recognized by law. The government recognizes customary marriages. Now my father-in-law has come requesting I settle my balance. The contract I entered in, when he entered into the contract, it was in the times of ignorance, but now I know the truth. I am caught. So he's caught between honouring his legal obligations and the truth that he has learned. What is my counsel, what is your counsel on how I should proceed in view of my contract obligations and the fact that if taken on a legal basis, the law of the land supports my father-in-law. So this might seem a thorny subject, but we have actually already dealt with a number of cases like this. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think we may already actually be in print on this issue. I'd have to go back and check. What I would recommend to this brother is if he goes and contacts Elder Tabo, because I assume this brother's from Zimbabwe, sounds like that, and Elder Tabo will be able to go into more details about how we've addressed this issue, because we have addressed it. It's not new and it's not unique. And for those of you who are listening, obviously my brother, the answer is that we would expect you to complete your obligations, your contractual obligations, to finish paying them, which is one point, but also to reiterate to both sets of parents, both families, the following piece of information, and that is this: that all the rituals and ceremonies that surround the inequality, I want to call it the slavery, of Lobola, the couple will no longer participate in. So if, for instance, the husband's family comes to visit him, that the way he and his wife will interact with their family will not be according to the customs of headship, I want to just call it slavery, or you might call it the bowler. All of these rituals and ceremonies that need to be practiced in order to maintain these cultural and social norms. So they should be made aware of that you will no longer participate, whether they like it or not. So you should be very strict and rigid about that. When it comes to the payment of the balance, we counsel people to not break the law, but to pay the money. But only pay the money once, as I've already said, that they've made the situation clear about their views on the bowler or dowry, and they won't practice that in their lives. Their children, if they were to come of age, they won't be brought up that way. They won't have that kind of a marriage. And the reason they may need to make all these things clear, because those things impact family members. So I'm hoping that is clear. I'd recommend that the brother speaks to Elder Tabo. We may already have a document or some guidance on this. If we don't, he will be able to give you some more help on this subject. But the answer is, you need to inform both sets of families that you do not practice all the rituals, the ceremonies that are connected to this human trafficking, Lobola, but that you will finish paying off the money, the debt, because that's a legal obligation. Next question. What is the true diet that God gave to his people? So the reason someone has asked this question is because of a question yesterday about medical missionary work. And it's a question that's come up a number of times. People have questioned, what is the movement's position on the medical missionary work? What impact will it have upon our work of, I guess, evangelism when we go to the world? And the reason they ask these questions is because Ellen White speaks so strongly on the subject. First of all, we need to understand that all of what Ellen White has told us needs to be contextualized and understood in its context. And the reason why I say that is because some of the branches of the medical missionary work are pretty much redundant today. we don't have to tell people to bathe regularly. Everybody does that. Exercise. There's so much information, so many government programs, so many gyms that are available for people to exercise. It's not like people don't know that. Fresh air, sunlight, etc. The problems that surround vitamin D are all subjects that are in vogue. So a true medical missionary isn't going to find some kind of niche market in that area. And what I highlighted was the problem that people, human beings, don't know how to eat. So the subject of diet reform is still, I'll just call it a hot topic. It's still, there's lots of avenues to and opportunities to help people. The problem is that as a people, from my observation, and I've been observing for a long time now, we don't seem to have a common consensus of what the true diet is that we should be eating. You can read the Spirit of Prophecy, you can glean information there, you can speak about having a vegan diet, but that really is not enough information. So it's not my place here, because I think we'd have to go into it in some depth to talk about what the true diet is that God gave to his people. But I want to just say it simply, rather than just saying I'm not talking about it, and that would be to say this: that as much as possible, if you can eat a whole plant-based diet, you would be well served. And when I talk about a whole food plant-based diet, what I mean is not just eating whole wheat bread. This is just one example. I'm not picking on bread for any particular reason. This has nothing to do with gluten, which is in many ways a fad that people have picked up on to trying to explain many of the woes and ills that human beings have. So I probably get a lot of feedback on that, which is fine. But I think the scaremongering that surrounds gluten in a number of situations really is that. It's just scaremongering. There's very little factuality behind that. But separate to that, when I talk about whole food, plant-based diet, whole food is not just whole wheat. It's actually trying to eat food in its most natural state without it being mechanically broken down. So if you're going to eat some kind of grain, a whole grain, boiled, steamed, is better than that grain that is then ground up and made into whatever product you're going to have at the end of that. A pie, bread, any kind of flour-based product. So it's far better to eat things whole than it is to essentially grind them up. So if you can just remember that idea, whole food, which means eating the food whilst they're still whole, not just all the components to having that part like whole wheat flour which has been ground down. So that's about all I want to say on the true diet that God has given to us. If you can eat that way, you'll do quite well without even me giving you any further advice than just that. Next question. What do we say about financial stability in this movement? Particularly on my side, I don't know what that means. I assume he's talking about his side of the world or his side of the water. Particularly on my side, most of us are youths, and we really find it difficult to carry on without financial stability. And this is due to the fact that most secular employment demands that people should work on the Sabbath, as well as in the business world. It's really difficult to thrive because of the normalized system of connection, meaning you need an inside man to work with you so you can get a job. We are faced with a lot of financial responsibilities, and this is really mentally heavy unto us, because we do wish to be financially stable in order to finance the work, our loved ones, and ourselves. Is there any exceptions to these challenges in relation to working on Sabbaths or having to comply with the normalized systems in the business world? So the person that asks this question in the framework or the context that they are suffering or struggling with something that's relatively new. And I'm saying this is not a new phenomena. The idea or the question of working on Sabbath is an age-old one. And if I can just simply answer it this way, there is no change in our position on working on the Sabbath. It was never good to work on the Sabbath. It is not good to work on the Sabbath. And in the future, it still won't be good to work on the Sabbath. There are some occasions when an emergency will occur. Again, I would refer someone back to their local leader or local elder to get more advice if they're unsure of what to do in their own situation. But generally, by and large, people should not be working on Sabbath. There has been no change. This is part of what Elder Tess labelled in her presentation of last month, this false freedom that people are experiencing. Next question. Since we have been studying what we need to do to serve our fellow human beings with love, that means we have to be there for them whenever it is due or necessary for us to do that. What's our stand or position regarding important events like attending a funeral or a wedding or a family gathering? And the context is of close friends or close family on the Sabbath day. So I'll try to repackage the question. What's our position on important events such as marriage and funerals if those events are occurring on the Sabbath day? How should we respond? So, particularly the issue of funerals has been addressed already in the movement. We know we have this clear evidence that our forefathers, the pioneers, the early Adventists, they would have funerals on the Sabbath day. It's not that I don't think it's super rare occurrence. So we do have a precedence that people were being baptized on the Sabbath. Did have their funerals on the Sabbath. They were laid to rest on the Sabbath. So we know that happens. I believe that Ellen White attended a funeral, and I believe one of her close relatives also was interned on the Sabbath day. When it comes to a wedding, I think it's safer for me to let people make their own decisions. If it's someone who's distant from you, you don't need to go to their wedding because you're distant. If it's someone close, what I would counsel, rather than just going to the wedding, is to talk to them and explain to them how you feel, how you see things. And you can have one or two outcomes. Either you can show them, persuade them why you can't attend, and if they're truly close to you, they would understand. Or you get them to change the date. If you're close, it seems to me that it's a reasonable request to make. People will argue that it's you against 100, 200 people, depending on how many people go to this particular wedding, and you can never win. But if you're going to invite 150 people, the vast majority of those people are friends or strangers or distant relatives. They're not close. So if you're really serious about this subject, I think people should take heed to your request about changing the date. If they're unwilling to do that, then I think it's reasonable to talk to them about the difficulty that you're facing. And again, if they really were caring and loving and you had a good relationship with them, which hopefully you do, then they would understand that you can't make it that day for them. So I would suggest that for weddings we don't attend. Funerals are a bit more problematic because funerals can happen any time and catch us by surprise. Someone's death can catch us by surprise, and you may have to attend a funeral on the Sabbath because that may be the only convenient time to have that funeral, etc. And as I say, we do have precedents for that funerals were conducted on the Sabbath day, and Ellen White attended. Next question, another business question. What is the position in our business transactions to either engaging, 1, in private-public partnerships, 2, getting loans or grants for business operations, 3, general dealings with governments and other corporations? Is it advisable to engage these long-term visions? So basically, how much interaction can we have with the world? I would begin by saying some of these connections that this person is describing are not long-term visions. Some of them are short to medium term. They don't have to necessarily be long. So I'm not sure what a private-public partnership is, but I'm assuming it's some kind of business that you're going into partnership with someone, and the person that you're going into partnership may or may not be someone in the movement. It's not clear, but the business that you set up is basically a public business. What I would suggest is the whole idea of getting into partnerships can be extremely problematic, and we should be very cautious about doing so. You really need to make sure you understand who it is that you're going into some contract with, because there are far too many cases where people in partnership have double-crossed their other partner and have run away with the assets. So please be careful before entering into a partnership with anybody. I personally would avoid it as much as I can. Point 2, getting loans or grants for business operations. I see no problem in getting loans or grants for business operations. I think people should do that. It's completely acceptable as long as you don't take too much of a loan, that you don't go too much into debt, that it's managed carefully, and it can be repaid off. Then I don't see any problems getting loans or grants. Point C, general dealing with governments and other corporations. I think this leads on. This is also based upon previous question that I received earlier. I think it may have been yesterday, about engaging with the world, because the world is Babylon. without going into all the finer details, what I want to say is, yes, I believe it's completely and perfectly acceptable to engage with governments and other businesses in the line of our work, whatever that may be. I don't think there's any problem in engaging with the world at that level. In relation to, or in connection to, what the Bible teaches and what Ellen White says about the nature of man. I guess the person wants an answer to that. What's the connection between how the Bible teaches the nature of man and how Ellen White teaches the nature of man? For example, in Genesis chapter 2 verse 7, and the threefold nature which Ellen White gives, what are the connections? So if you can open your Bibles to Genesis 2:7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So the question someone's asking is, how do we relate to what the Bible teaches and what Ellen White teaches? So this is based upon some of the material that I've presented this weekend about how we read things. So I think this is a nice example that Ellen White talks about a threefold nature, and obviously in Genesis 2:7 you don't see a threefold nature, you see a twofold nature. Now Ellen White speaks about the mental, spiritual and physical nature of a human being, mental, spiritual and physical, but in Genesis 2:7 you don't see that. You just see the physical, and then you see this breath of life, two parts. I don't think there's any contradiction between them. When you see what's spoken of in Genesis, the internal workings of Adam, the human being there, isn't well described. Its purpose isn't to explain the nature of his kingdom, the nature of man. It's just given a small synopsis of how human beings were created. Ellen White's commentary gives much more detail. So I don't think they're contradictory terms. You have to read those things in context. Can we participate in voting for the president whom we have seen that he is helping the last... Let me try to rephrase this. Can we participate in voting for the president whom we have seen that he is helping the last 6 commandments? Or in short, can we vote? So I'm not fully sure what the person is asking about the last part of the first question. The second question was straightforward. In short, can we vote? I think you can all go to Ellen White and see what she says about voting. I really don't have a strong opinion on the subject. I think if you were to read Ellen White's position on the subject and try to understand how you would apply that here at the end of the world, I think you'd be able to make a decision for yourself whether or not you would vote or not vote. If the words may evolve from chapter to chapter, how are we supposed to know what they mean? What is the technique we should use to identify the meaning of a word? So there's not one specific technique. There are a number of techniques to understand what the meaning of the word is. First of all, you'd want to either use a lexicon or a dictionary to try to find out the meaning of the word, the dictionary definition. And then what you really want to do, because the question is about the meaning and they're using it in the hermeneutical sense, how would you find out the meaning? You have to use various techniques. and I'll just give three. You need to bring all the statements that are connected or related to one subject together. Then you have to take context, and then you need to understand whether you're dealing with a principle or a policy. Now, that may be too fast for some of you, and if that's the case, I want to recommend that you go to last week's study, where I've discussed those three principles in some detail. So this word is evolving through the chapter, and in order to understand what is meant by that word as you travel through the chapter, you have to look at context, the immediate context, what's going on in the outside world. You have to bring in a number of pieces of data in order to understand clearly what it is that you're reading. You can't just read and assume that you worked it out before, and therefore that model or idea holds true. Person mentions chapter to chapter. I mentioned from verse to verse. Daniel 8:12, Daniel 8:11 talks about the daily, and you see completely different meanings for those two words depending on the immediate context. So that's how we're supposed to do it. It's really to understand context in order to identify the true meaning of the word. Next question. The presentation that was done last week, if I understood correctly, you mentioned three rules that we should consider. Bring all the content, connected statements together, look at context, and then principle or policy. And that's correct. They're the three issues that I spoke about when you read a passage in Scripture. Then the questioner says, can you give an example of these rules or principles in action? How do these rules or principles operate? How do they work? And I'm not going to answer that question. There's that would be a bit too detailed. If I get an opportunity in the future, I try to give some more examples on this subject, but I don't have anything to hand, and if I did, I don't think I'd want to share it quite yet. So that's all the questions that I received today. So now I'm going to go and revert back to the questions that I missed yesterday. My question: as an individual, why should I be in this message, this movement? What is in it for me? So I want to answer that question by quoting from the United States President at his inaugural speech. He said this: ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. So you'll see hopefully that this is a chiasm. There's a balance there. But separate to that, what I want us to see is the question that's being asked in our question is the same one that's being addressed here. The questioner wants to know, why should he stay in the movement? What is in it for him? And what I want him to see is that he shouldn't be asking, he or she shouldn't be asking what the movement can do for them. They should actually be asking, what is it that they can do for the movement? This is what the President's words mean. Don't ask what the movement can do for you. Ask what you can do for the movement. Are the prophets in this generation, subject to the rules and experiences of the dispensation 1989 to the Second Advent? I think broadly speaking, yes. How are we to understand the concept that the second messenger does not make mistakes in light of that? In other words, how do hermeneutics apply in what the prophets of this generation say and seem to develop as their understanding grows? So there are a number of things that I want us to get to grips with here. If you've kept track of the studies that have been presented with respect to the first angel and then the second and third who join forces, come together, when you consider those two, we have said that the first angel always has mistakes built into their message, preconceived ideas. And we can say that from different perspectives, that it's something that's negative, but we could also say as a matter of fact or a matter of necessity. It's necessary that when they come out of this Laodicean condition, they have to draw people to this movement, and in order to draw them, they need to give them a bait before they switch on them, which is called a switch and bait technique. And unless they did that, they wouldn't be able to create a movement. Once the movement is created, then the dynamics change, and this is where the second angel begins to come on board and to preach its message. And in this context, this is where the second angel comes, because now you have a mature, stable movement that isn't wet behind the ears, if I can use that phrase. And so the way the second angel is going to approach things as directed by God is without mistakes. Now obviously we're all human and we have our own idiosyncrasies which can produce perturbations in some of the things we do or say. That goes without saying, of course. And also we do continue to learn. That also needs to be considered. I've already alluded to the fact that Ellen White develops her understanding of doctrine or theology, and therefore we would assume that we too in this movement would develop our understanding, our thinking on the subject. Just trying to make sure I've answered all the points in the question. Are the prophets in this generation subject to the rules, experiences of the dispensation? Yes, they are. How are we to understand the concept Let me rephrase this. How are we to understand the concept that the second messenger does not make mistakes in light of that? I think when it talks about these mistakes, what we want to, or at least what I want us to understand, is mistakes that are provided, this might be an unusual way to say this, provided by God. There aren't mistakes that God needs to introduce into this movement, particularly when it comes to the second and third, in order to make a point or to deliver a particular truth or do some good to the movement, as was necessary with the first angel. So when we have spoken about the first, second and third angels and the mistakes they make or don't make, I think we need to be careful how we're approaching this. Person then goes on to say, in other words, how do hermeneutics apply in what the prophets of this generation say and seem to develop as their understanding grows? A few years ago, 2015 into 16, this movement got really excited about the Hazon and the Mareh visions. And when they did that, they gravitated to Daniel chapter 10. And when they did that, we knew in some shape or form that that event was going to occur at midnight. And knowing that, the question that I posed as I went around teaching was the following. Daniel has a Marah experience vision in Daniel chapter 10. He falls to his knees and he goes into, I'll just call it a vision. The question I asked is, when we take that experience, that parable, and bring it into our own experience, our own generation, does that mean on one particular night, all of the priests of this movement, when they go to sleep, that they are going to have this visionary experience, this Marah experience? They're going to look at Christ and they're going to have a response that looks like death. Are we going to have that experience? For one thing, it couldn't be all on one night because we live all around the globe, so it'd be all in 2 nights. That would be the first problem. And the second one is that do we really expect us to have a supernatural experience in that way when we have striven not to introduce such spiritualistic elements into our teaching? What I described, and I think is a much more accurate idea of what's about to happen, back then of course, was the following scenario. That we would have a fresh revelation of Christ, the Marah vision, connected with the Mareh vision. We would have this vision of Christ through Scripture. So we'd read familiar passages that we've read perhaps numerous times before and see them in a new light. And that would give us the revelation of Christ that we need at this juncture, and also to help us to see what that would look like. So I'm saying we would go to familiar passages of inspiration, and we would have a fresh revelation of Christ than we had beforehand, using the same data. That's what I was suggesting the Marah experience would be. So having said that, let's come back to the question. In other words, how do hermeneutics applying what the prophets of this generation say and seem to develop as their understanding grows? There's no problem in having a development of one's understanding and growth. Elder Tess and myself have advocated that and have been proponents of this for a long time now. We are not trying to shy away from the idea that not only us but other people in the movement do grow in their understanding. But what we want to see, what we want to understand, is that when we talk about this growth and development, that the movement currently is not making mistakes in the following sense, that these are problems that God has shown us or not shown us because of some kind of inherent weakness in us. That's what distinguishes the first angel from the second and the third. This is question 12 from yesterday. I mentioned, that prophets are not immune to the time and environment in which they live, and that infiltrates into their writings, to their teachings. If one does not accept this fact, they have either one of two options. They suppress the obvious truth, or they reject the spirit of prophecy in the Bible, but not the pure biblical morality. Can I elaborate on how one actually rejects the spirit of prophecy in the Bible while still holding very much onto strict biblical morality and appearing to be a very good Seventh-day Adventist. So I want to just make a small point. It really isn't a big one, and I don't want to make a huge issue out of it, but I'm not overly persuaded that there is such a thing as biblical morality. Depending on what we mean by biblical, if we mean the Bible, the book itself, morality existed long before the Bible was ever written. Morality existed in the hearts and minds of people long before they ever had access to the Bible, even after it had been written and it had been locked away. So I don't think there's this thing called biblical morality. I think there's either morality or the opposite, which is immorality. Don't know if there's something called biblical morality, but I guess what this person is talking about is the rules and standards that God has set up as being right and wrong. And we could just turn to, say, the Spirit of Prophecy or to Ellen White's writings, and they would define what God identifies as being right and wrong. I would like to direct us to the studies that were done in Portugal, and we spent a number of hours looking at the subject of morality. And the reason that becomes important is because morality is dealing with the subject of truth and error, what is right and what is wrong, in the context of a relationship. It's not in the context of some absolute theory or idea. Morality is all about relationships. And because of that, I'm not persuaded there is such a thing as biblical morality, but there is a morality, there is a behavior that God expects his people to follow. And I'm not arguing that it's not written out in the Bible, but I guess that's what this person means. But many of those principles can be derived empirically by experience. You don't need inspiration, and hopefully without being misunderstood, you don't actually need God to work it out either. It's inherently inbuilt into the system, into the machine that you and I are. We're a machine, we're a threefold nature machine. We are in many ways autonomous beings, that we can think for ourselves, make decisions for ourselves, and based upon that principle, there are millions, billions of people in this world who are not Christians, don't follow a biblical model, are atheistic, or of another persuasion in their religious beliefs, and they seem to be pretty moral as well. And in fact, surprisingly, they have pretty much the same set of morals that we have. Not so surprising, obviously. And I'm saying the reason that they do is because this morality is inherently inbuilt into a human being. People often think that human beings are inherently evil or sinful. We spoke about Dr. Timothy Jennings in our last presentation, and one of the things that he spoke about is that humans are infected with sin like it's some kind of disease, and he said he affirms to that, and it's true and it's correct. And it's not, I'm not here to challenge or argue with him, but I do want to say that there is strong, unequivocal scientific research that proves and demonstrates that babies from a very young age are inherently, that means it's part of their nature, they weren't trained this, it's inbuilt, they are inherently empathetic. They can have empathy at an extremely young age. And however...
Hello, Elder Parminder. Sorry, the translators are saying you're going
too fast. I'm sorry.
Could you please slow down a bit?
People believe that human beings are born naturally sinful or evil, and this is one of the models that Timothy Jennings has when he thinks that sin is like an infectious disease that we are born with. We're born diseased, and we have to find this cure. I don't want to challenge that in any strong fashion. There is some truth to that thought. However, it is far too simplistic. There is credible, rock solid research that's been done over the years, and some of this is not new, that demonstrates that babies from a very young age, which would therefore mean they have this inherently, they haven't learnt this, that they have empathy, they are empathetic. And without looking at what empathy means, its definition, we all should have an awareness that empathy is the antipathy or the opposite of selfishness. If you're empathetic, you're not selfish. There are opposite ends of relationships. So it's not as simple to say we are born infected with this disease of sin. And it's our unwillingness, our willing ignorance, our willful ignorance on such issues that cripples our ability to understand how to behave properly. When we're not willing to see that human beings were created loving creatures, it's inherent in us. We're not born inherently wicked or sinful or selfish to the degree that we do not understand what it means to have altruistic love, to have love, unconditional love for someone or something else. I am saying there is so much good evidence to prove otherwise, to prove that we do have that love inbuilt into us. We basically have to grow out of that inherent position to become the wicked people that most of us are. So I've spent some time dealing with this question, and when we speak about rejecting the Bible, rejecting spirit of prophecy, it does not make you immoral if you reject those things. This is a mistake that we have made. Ellen White says those people who reject the testimonies eventually reject the Bible, reject God, and go out into the wicked world. And that all sounds, if you like, quite comforting. If you stay, it means you haven't rejected God, you're a good person. However, I want to remind us that the world is also good in so many ways. So many people in the world are moral. And if morality means being a good person, and a good person means being like God, then there are so many people in the world, we call them Nethinims or Greeks or worldly people, they are morally good. They have biblical morality as well. You don't need to read the Bible to have biblical morality. I'm sure all of us have been infected with something, and it's called advertisement. Adverts permeate everywhere around us. You can't escape. And what happens with these adverts is that they shape and mold you into a certain way of thinking. They persuade you, for instance, to buy some washing up powder. They draw you in almost unconsciously through branding, through catchy phrases. What I want to say is that the Bible didn't copy that idea from them, they copied that idea from the Bible, from God. They worked it out. The Bible wants to draw you in. It does not want to draw you in morally. It doesn't need to do that because we are inherently moral beings. We don't need the Bible to teach us morality. I've spoken about this for over 3 years, and today there are still people who will tell me that God has made them good, that they used to be selfish and they prayed a lot and now they're not so selfish, that it's praying or reading about Jesus that has done that for them. And I would beg to differ. I understand by beholding we become good. If we read stories about helping people, when we come to a place that someone needs help, that story will be triggered in our mind and we'll think, yeah, it'd be good to help. This is how advertising works. When you go to the supermarket and you have to choose between 3 types of detergent, almost unconsciously you will choose the one that you saw on an advert. It has that powerful influence, and that's what the Bible does. It wants to draw you in, and the more it draws you in, what you end up seeing, which is God's plan, is the deeper meaning behind what you're reading. And we in this movement call that prophecy. So the reason the Bible is so engaging, is so interesting, because it talks about these human interest stories that draw us in and captivate our attention so that we can hopefully delve a little bit deeper and learn about prophecy. That's the intention of it. It's like if you were given some medicine to take by your mouth, you would use a chaser of honey or a sweet drink to take it down, to neutralize the bitterness. And that's what the Bible is doing. It's a really clever methodology. So you can throw away the Bible and you will still be as moral as you were before. I don't think you need to read those Bible stories to make you into a moral person. However, if you read the Gospels over and over again, things begin to get imprinted in your mind. So when a situation arises and you have to decide between good or bad, those stories reverberate in your mind. Those synapses have already been connected of doing good. So it's easier to do good than bad because you've read so many stories on this, and you will fall into a groove of doing good. It's like habit. So the Bible does help from that perspective. I'm not arguing that. But what I do want to say is, if you rejected the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, you will destroy your ability to understand prophecy, but you won't necessarily jeopardize or destroy your ability to be a moral person. I don't think it works that way. So the question ends by saying, can I elaborate on how a person rejects the spirit of prophecy and the Bible while still holding to strict biblical morality and appearing to be, they say, a very good Adventist. I'm saying a very good person. And hopefully I've explained how that works. It really does work that way. You can be a good moral person, upright citizen, without being an Adventist or without believing in the spirit of prophecy. The Bible and the spirit of prophecy give us much more than just morality in that sense. Question 13. In the past, we have attacked Uriah Smith and his criticism on the spirit of prophecy, arguing that there is something like inspired words and other just personal opinions, ending up finally in degrees of inspiration. Aren't we doing the same? No, we're not doing the same. Whoever's question this is, at least I don't think that I'm doing the same. Are we not doing the same when we say some statements of hers are influenced by the sexist views of her time and just are incorrect? Or in other words, was Smith wrong at all at the end, regardless of his motivation? Aha. Motivation is critical. Let me repackage the question. Uriah Smith and others are going to develop an argument that not everything Ellen White says is inspired. Some bits are, some bits are not. And the questioner is saying, Elder Parminder, aren't you saying the same thing? And I'm saying, no, I don't believe that I am. What Uriah Smith did, his objective was to destroy Ellen White's influence. He had an objective that on the present truth testing issues, he wanted to destroy her influence. What I'm saying is when we go back into Ellen White's writings and we look at them objectively, I'm not trying to destroy her, I'm trying to lift her up and place her writings in their proper, true setting. That was not Smith's objective. Motivation is critical in understanding what is right and what is wrong. You cannot just look at the act, you have to look at the motivation. And Uriah Smith's motivation was, above all things, evil. They were not good. And of course, my motivation is pure, honourable, and righteous, unlike his. So, I'm not doing the same thing as him at all. I'm just being objective to the fact that when God chooses a prophet, they become part of the story as well as objective analyzers of the story. They can't help that. It's part of human nature. I'm just observing a fact. What Uriah Smith was doing was a sustained attack on Ellen White and her ministry because he didn't like what she said. He wanted to have cognitive dissonance. And I'm hoping, and I guess you're hoping, that I'm not doing that same thing as well. Question 14. Pertaining to your statements about a prophet being influenced by the times and susceptible to teaching something wrong, but seeing their thoughts on a matter evolve, is that same principle applicable to this dispensation? Not only the first angel, Elder Jeff, but the second and third angel. Thank you for not putting my name there. But the second and third angel, and how does that tie into the study of the second and third angels? Don't make mistakes. So I do want to add Elder Tess's name there. Elder Jeff, the first angel. Elder Tess, when we start thinking about the second and third angel, she has to fit in that story. Are they open for scrutiny? What does it mean that they don't make mistakes and that we are to have implicit trust in them? Are they not susceptible to a cult of personality as well? So this is the question that comes up over and over again. And whilst I don't want to disparage this question because I'm trying to answer it, I do want to say most people who ask this question do so in order to destroy the influence of the present truth messengers of this time. There is nobody in the dispensation when Elder Jeff was doing his work that was speaking about him in this fashion. And I want to tell you all, including the questioner, this idea is not a new one. We didn't work this out in the last few months after Elder Jeff left. This principle, this idea, has been understood and was alive and well for a long time while he was the leader of the movement. And no one spoke about him in this context. So my initial thoughts to answer a question such as this is that we should be careful about the way we frame our questions and what we ask. When someone says, are they open for scrutiny? The obvious answer is, of course we're open for scrutiny. Now, I don't know what's in the heart of this person, but questions like that, in my experience, are questions that are designed to entrap the person who answers them. For me to say, we're not open for scrutiny, it's obviously crazy. Especially when I spoke about when truth is presented, etc. Scrutiny is perfectly fine. I'll read it again to you. Superficiality is the bane of scholarship. Truth has nothing to fear from thorough investigation or scrutiny. It thrives on scrutiny. Its very nature courts the light. We are open to scrutiny, and anyone and everybody is free to scrutinize what we say and what we teach. I, like every single one of you, is part of this story as well as being an objective observer of what's going on. And when I have been taught things by Elder Tess, in the same way that you have been taught things by her, she has had to be open to my scrutiny as well. I don't know if people think that she and I have some secret alliance, some club, that we have a pact that whatever she said, I would just buy into it, accept it, hook, line and sinker. Of course not. When I was confronted with the Midnight Cry message, with the issues of nationalism, racism, of homophobia, of sexism, of sisters wearing trousers, of sisters becoming elders, I had to scrutinize the things that were confronting me. So she has come under my scrutiny. And I'm sure she would testify that when she first joined the movement, she would scrutinize what I would teach and preach and discuss. So of course we're open for scrutiny. We have scrutinized each other. You might believe that me scrutinizing Elder Tess is not genuine in some way, and I would beg to differ. I would say that my scrutiny is as good, if not better than most people's scrutiny, not because I'm better than most people, but because I know her better, and I'm therefore able to scrutinize her in season, out of season. And most of you don't have that closeness to her, to Elder Tabo, to other leaders in the movement, and therefore your ability to scrutinize is not as good as those people with whom they mix on a more intimate level. So every single one of us, of course, should scrutinize. We have never said anything contrary to that. The question is, most people who scrutinize, from my experience, the way they do that is often in an unhealthy and disparaging way. I would ask people, maybe the questioner, go back and scrutinize what we have taught over this camp meeting. Check if I have made errors or mistakes. I don't mean typos or misspellings. I mean fundamental mistakes in what I've taught. Go back and check my analysis of Brother Jennings' work and how I have spoke about him. Go check those people who have had first-hand testimony of the scattering that's going on in our movement today by these wolves that have entered into the flock and caused people a great amount of distress. Go and check those things, scrutinize them. And after you have done that, it would be well to actually come back and give your testimony. Because what I tend to find is people who do this scrutiny, who ask for the right for scrutiny, they almost seem to be do it in a sense of baiting us. But once they do scrutinize, they never come back and actually say, yes, we have been found to be correct and true and accurate. So, by all means, we should all be scrutinizing what's being taught. Then it says, what does it mean that they don't make mistakes? I've already explained what it means not to make mistakes. It means this movement is mature. It means that God is not going to introduce or allow us to have a mistake or an error taught in the movement because we didn't know any better. In 1989, there was no way that a Sunday law was ever going to be enforced by the United States or the United Nations, the 6th and 7th kingdoms of Bible prophecy. That was never going to happen. Why is it that that was taught? Was it just some craziness that Elder Jeff had? No, I don't believe that. We've spoken about this extensively. What happened was that God was dealing with a movement that was Laodicean in its thinking. And in order to draw them into this movement, to draw them out of Adventism, the creation of the stone, God had to use something. And what he had to use was this pre-existing erroneous ideas of end-time prophecy. We no longer have those erroneous ideas. That is what it means when we talk about mistakes. And then the questioner speaks about, are we to have implicit trust in them? If you trust the methodology, then yes, you should have implicit trust in those people that God has raised. If God has raised somebody, why would you not have implicit trust in them? If you don't believe that God has raised them up, or you believe that they have made shipwreck of their work, then don't have implicit trust in them. Leave the movement and start your own movement. Or have a coup d'etat and depose those people who are leading the movement and take over. because that's what the natural order of things would be if someone doesn't have implicit trust in the leaders of God's movement. Then it says, are they not susceptible to the cult of personality? Of course they are. Everybody is. Everybody's susceptible to failure. What you have to ask yourselves is, have they failed? Not are they susceptible to failure. I would ask the question, was Jesus susceptible to the cult of personality when he came down at his first advent? I don't know how someone would answer that question. Was Jesus susceptible to the cult of personality? If your answer is no, all good and well. If your answer is yes, then I would say that the questioner, or this question, is a pointless, is a vain or a moot point. Because if Jesus is susceptible, of course every human being is susceptible. And therefore, what's the point of asking that question? Except, it seems to me, to cast some kind of doubt on the ministry and the authority of God's appointed messengers. By the way, in my opinion, and I don't think it's just my opinion, my reading of Spirit of Prophecy is that Jesus was susceptible to the cult of personality. In fact, I would venture to say that was one of the 3 temptations that was offered to him by Satan when he went into the wilderness. He wanted to make him into a cult leader. Judas Iscariot wanted to do the same. There's plenty of evidence that Jesus had that temptation to be that leader. I would call it that false view of the Messiah. So if Jesus is susceptible, every human being is susceptible, and therefore it's a vain question. When I mean vain question, I mean theologically vain. I'm not trying to infer that the person who asked the question is necessarily evil. I don't know the motivation or the heart of the person who asked the question. It could be completely genuine, but I'm saying theologically this is a vain, pointless question, because everyone is susceptible to the cult of personality, even Jesus Christ. So I was given 29 questions, and I'm sorry to say that I've got 5 left. So I answered 24 out of 29 questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to answer all the questions. For the person who asked about dancing and music, etc., talking about music and dancing has been sexual, etc., so I didn't get a chance to answer those questions. I wasn't particularly trying to avoid them. I just thought the other questions were more pertinent to the discussion at hand. Our camp meeting is over. I want to thank you for all participating. I want to thank you for being invited to be able to share my thoughts with you. I hope we've all had a blessed time together. And for those of you who are willing and able, I'll meet you next week. Not same time, same place, although the place will be the same from where I am, but it won't be at the same time. It's another 3-day camp meeting, I believe. Friday, Sabbath, Sunday. The times are slightly different. They will get posted in the various forums, and if you're able to, I look forward to meeting you. For the others who won't be able to make it, it's been a blessing fellowshipping with you, although it's not really a two-way communication, but I hope that in some shape or form we've had some kind of connection one with another. God bless. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. We want to ask and pray that you would guide, direct, and bless us. Lord, for all the brothers and sisters who have listened to these presentations, and all those that will yet hear them, I want to ask for a special outpouring of your Holy Spirit upon them. Father, sometimes we have difficult, complex questions, and they need to be answered. I hope that I have been able to give a fair representation of your will when it comes to these issues, to these questions. For those that I have not been able to cover, I pray, Lord, that you would in some way answer the needs of those people. For the questions I have answered, I hope that they have served you well, Lord, and that they have helped to explain to your children a little bit more about who and what you are and how you think and feel. Be with us and bless us, we pray, through the rest of this week. In Jesus' name, amen.